Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. For 365 days a year, it's duck season somewhere at Ramsey Russell's GetDucks.com. The world of duck hunting is way bigger than our backyard. The very best duck hunts in Argentina and Mexico are only the beginning. We specialize exclusively in 6 continents worth of proven waterfowl hunting adventures. Whether you're looking for a unicorn species or a fun trigger pulling vacation of epic proportion, we've got the right hunt dialed in. Real duck hunts and authentic experiences for serious duck hunters. As a genuine American duck hunter myself, I know the difference. Founded in 2003, GetDucks.com is not just what we do, it's all we do. I've been there personally many times. Our reputation speaks for itself. Anita and I are personally available to assist before, during, and after your trip because you deserve nothing less. Looking for something closer to home? The next great hunt is closer than you think. Contact proven operators throughout the U.S. and Canada at our U.S. hunt list. Explore worldwide duck hunting at GetDucks.com. All package details, photos, videos, stories, and thousands of client testimonials right there at your fingertips. GetDucks.com. Ball Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shots come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever be like good old-fashioned lead. No way. Say goodbye to all the gimmicky, high recoil compensation science and marketing hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck season somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations. Folks, thank y'all for joining us today for another great episode. I hope it's late May as this is being recorded, and I hope that this cootie quarantine is starting to let up in your part of the world, and I hope that things are beginning to resemble normalcy again. Thank y'all for listening today. Live from balmy North Dakota, I have got Mr. John Devney, Vice President of Delta Waterfowl, on the line. How are you, John?
I'm doing great, Ramsey. How are you, man?
I'm good. Tell me what's going on. It's late May. What is going on in North Dakota? What's the weather like? What's the ducks doing? How's things going?
Yeah, it's been an interesting spring. You know, spring came pretty early, and then it got cold, and then it'd get nice, and then it'd get cold, and then it'd get nice, and then it'd get cold. But, you know, for the most part, we've been dealing with spring since the 1st of May. Ducks got back here right on time. I think, which is what time? You know, we start getting them back in late March and early April, typically. And then we had we had some pretty crummy weather, Ramsey, and, you know, it sent some of them back. The snow goose migration was screwed up like a soup sandwich this year just because the geese would push in real good. And then we get cold weather and the snow and then push them back, and they yo-yoed around a little bit. And it was kind of interesting to watch because you know, sort of where I live here in Bismarck and then east of here, we were kind of like the absolute northern edge of the canvasback and ringneck migration. And man, those dudes were here in huge numbers. They were here for a couple of weeks till they could get a runway to start heading further north. So, but, you know, we got, I would say, I haven't been out in the field, although we got lots of folks out doing research and nest ragging, but I would bet the only species that doesn't put eggs on the dirt right now are bluebills. Everybody else is hard at work, and we've seen the first few mallard broods and Canada goose broods and pintail broods. So, you know, it's spring on the prairies.
That's interesting, man. I tell you what, that's just it's amazing to me that there's already next year's fall flight on the ground, these little yellow fuzzballs already moving around. And
yep. and what we know about those, if you go back and you look at the literature, you look at the science of breeding ducks, what we know about ducks is there's this pretty interesting trade-off, Ramsey. So if you hatch early and your ducklings hit the water early, they have a much higher likelihood of surviving.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yep.
That. How are the pintails doing in North Dakota this year?
They're going to be, we've got great water conditions in North Dakota.
Good.
I think, and it's pretty bloody dry in Saskatchewan. So I think we're going to catch a bunch of those ducks. So yeah, they're hard at it. I think both here and in eastern South Dakota, we're going to have a pile of pintails, but we'll never be able to measure how big a pile of pintails that we're going to have because we don't have a duck survey this year.
Yeah. John, a couple of questions I always like to ask people is, for people listening, and myself, of course, is can you describe a little bit, before we get into the conversation further, we all know you're Vice President of Delta Waterfowl, but who are you as a person? What is your background? Who are your influences growing up? How do you go from a little boy growing up where you did to Vice President of Delta Waterfowl, committing yourself to waterfowl research? How do you do this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up in Minnesota. I was lucky enough to have a dad that loved to hunt and fish. My first duck hunt, Ramsey, I was 4 years old.
Wow.
I grew up kind of north and east of St. Paul, and my dad did most of his duck hunting, loved to hunt diving ducks in north central Minnesota, but he had a little place that he could hunt close to home when his work was busy, and that he could sneak out to. And when I was 4 years old, he took me to that little pothole and told me not to step in cow pies, threw a gunny sack over the top of me and told me to shut up. And that was my first duck hunting experience. And how anybody sort of emerges from that experience to, duck hunting be sort of the center of my life, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, I grew up spending a lot of time duck hunting and fishing and other kinds of hunting with my dad. And, as a kid, the neighbor kid's father was also a big duck hunter. He was a number of years older than me. And I grew up on a lake in the suburbs of St. Paul. And, every fall we'd build duck blinds down on the beach, and we had hand-me-down duck decoys, hand-me-down wet tip boots, and hand-me-down duck calls. And I spent virtually every night of my youth, watching the ducks and listening to them call and trying to imitate it, reading books about duck hunting and making decoys out of Hylex bottles and 2-liter Coke jugs and doing all the stuff that a kid that was ate up with duck hunting was. And had the chance to come to Delta when I just before I turned 28 years old. And here we are, 22 years later now, and, getting to live out one of the things that's most important to me in my life, both duck hunting and duck conservation. Get to do it for a living. I'm a pretty blessed guy, Ramsey.
Where did you go to college and grad school?
Well, just so everybody's on the same page, John Devney is not a biologist. I play one on television and I play one on the radio. My degree is actually in political science and philosophy from a little itty bitty liberal arts college in central Minnesota called St. John's University. So I don't have a professional biological background. I've sort of learned on the fly. Lots of bright people here at Delta, and then lots of other professionals who taught me a great deal over the last 20 years.
I think that's really important. You do a great job. You do such a great job communicating need to hear information that guys like me don't know. I did assume you were a biologist. I would still describe you as a functional biologist because in the world of policy, in the world of getting the word out and stuff like that, that's very interesting in political science and philosophy.
So nobody's going to confer any honorary PhDs on my goofy ass. I can't do math. So.
I can't either. Oh, that was terrible. Math's my weak spot, man. Hey, but I get back to this, because you brought up a couple of good points, talking about growing up hunting with your daddy in Minnesota. Have you got, what is your favorite hunt and your favorite place to hunt?
You know, it's interesting. I grew up as a kid that thought, you know, any old idiot could shoot a mallard. We had them on every suburban lake where I grew up. They were half domesticated. I had, mallard ducklings eating bread out of my mouth as a child. I never thought they were terribly interesting. And, my dad's big love of duck hunting was hunting diving ducks, bluebills, cans, redheads, ringnecks on big water. And so that's really where my passion was as a kid growing up in Minnesota. And, I'd compete with anybody on your podcast to be the number one fastest decoy rapper in the world, because I was rapping 7 dozen of them with 12-foot of cord 2 times a day. I was pretty good at rapping decoy cords. I may be better at rapping decoys than anything else in my life, actually. But today, if I had to tell you a hunt that I absolutely, treasure, is I love shooting green-winged teal, cherry-picking green-winged teal drakes on a late October day, 12-mile-an-hour wind, big blue sky, and a cattail marsh 20 minutes from my house. Those are the hunts that I cherish the most. I've decided green-winged teal is about the perfect duck. A limited fat green-winged teal is the perfect meal for my family and I love those little devils. They've become my favorite duck.
My favorite duck is the next one. Just about every time I try to key in on what my favorite duck is, it changes. It changes with the next duck that comes in. And but I really do like green wings. And worldwide that I've been that green wings exist, they are the preferred table fare.
Yep.
Everywhere, every hunting camp I've been in, and the continental United States that shoots green wings, Azerbaijan, Russia, Pakistan, all those countries that shoot green wings, they like that. That's what they like. Of all the ducks we're going to Azerbaijan, we shoot a lot of Eurasian green wings, and we shoot mallard, we shoot pintails, we shoot gadwalls. But boy, when it comes time to let's cook dinner tonight, they want the green wings. That tells a lot about that little bird to me.
Well, and they're a sporty little duck, right? And they do cool stuff. And I mean, I think back on some memorable green wing hunts I've had, and I've had some beautiful ones here in North Dakota. I had a green wing hunt in the Bear River marshes of Utah. I'll never forget.
Boy, absolutely.
I saw rivers of green wing teal coming over us for 4 hours, and hunting in the shallow marsh up near the Refuge boundary there, and they're just, I don't know. It's interesting for a guy that, and I've been blessed to hunt lots of places and shoot way more ducks than the man should be entitled to. And listen, I love shooting mallards in the timber, and I love shooting sprig whenever I can, and I like shooting geese. But man, I tell you, I've gotten to the point where I really like shooting and eating fresh teal.
Yeah. What time of year did you shoot the green wings in Utah?
That would have been in late December. Would have been in late November, after Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Were y'all doing the classical Utah setup, Great State Lock, where you hunted in the black spread with the silhouettes?
No, we did that the next day. This was a marsh hunt way up north on the Willard Spur.
Yeah, been there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we were hunting back up in the marsh, and beautiful cattail and phragmite marsh. It was a big south wind, big blue sky, and the ducks couldn't. You could hide an elephant in that vegetation, as you well know, Ramsey.
Yeah.
We had the wind and the sun at our back. It was kind of a midday hunt. And, I mean, honest to goodness, we had rivers of green-winged teal coming over us for 3 hours. there were 4 guns in the blind. We shot, what did we shoot? I shot a mallard because I'm from North Dakota. One of the guys shot a pintail. One of the guys shot a 10 green wing teal, but we kind of went one gun at a time and just cherry picked drakes out of these big bunches. I think we shot we've been allowed 28 ducks. We shot 24 drake green wing teal on that hunt.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, that really reminds me. That's I hunted with Chad Yamani out there, and we weren't in Willard. I really can't recall where we were. We may have been on the Refuge, but the teal that time of year were in the alkali bull rush. That's what they were keying in on to eat. And it was just, we shot a few shovers just because old Ramsey was there, but it was just, we sat and waited on those green wings, and we tried to target the drakes because you could. It was just, but when you looked out in the wide open where those birds were rafting, and you got close enough that they could hear the airboat motor and get up, it was. I'd counted on one of the 5 greatest sights in waterfowl I've ever just witnessed. Just the God, I'd say million. There were millions of them flying. It was clouds and clouds and clouds up, up in the air.
And we can get them here, not in Great Lake sort of numbers, but when they're here and you're in the right place, it ain't 5 at a time. They're big bunches of them wheeling around, and they make mistakes fairly frequently, and they're fun to shoot. And like we said, they're the most wonderful duck to pick and the most wonderful duck to eat. I have a lot of affinity for those little buggers.
Well, y'all got plenty of them too. I know I have been on some really good green wing teal hunts in the Dakotas and up in Canada, but you're not going to shoot them out in the fields. You've got to, and you're not going to shoot them in the deep water. You've got to find those little bitty. It seems to me that when we shoot the gadwalls and the green wings, we've got to find these little bitty, mucky little marshes, shallow water. And if there's still blue wings, there usually is in September. You'll get into blue wings too. They select those little bitty areas that they want to hunt, or that they want to use.
The green wings here spend a lot of time on mud flats. And so a marsh that's got a little mud flat, or a lot of even the bigger marshes here and in Canada, big shallow marshes, from time to time, all it takes is a wind shift to change the location of those mud flats. We're talking about crazy shallow water, and wind blows out of the west, you got a mud flat in the west, and the wind turns around, blows out of the east, you got a mud flat in the east. And those green wings seem to be right on that mud, and they like rubbing in and eating those invertebrates and then going and finding seeds in those shallow wetlands.
That's right. I know opening weekend in Arkansas, I hunted in a camp in Arkansas for 10 years, and the coveted draw for opening day was a particular pitch that, like you say, if the wind was out of the north, it was dry on the north side of the blind and just mud flat out in front of it, depending on how hard it. But all those ducks needed was just a little bit to get just enough mud to land in to get their feet wet.
Yep.
And that they didn't need water; they just needed mud. And it was always green wings. It was a green wing shoot of epic proportion on that opening weekend, especially. It just those little mud flats. I guess I do like green wings. Kind of like blue wings. I like all the ducks. I'm just a bird nerd like that. I find something beautiful in all of them. And the green wings are hard to beat. So are you? Now, tell me this. I'd ask you your favorite hunt. Now, you do travel. You do get around. You do hunt the flyways and business meetings and travel and associate. Have you got a favorite place to hunt or a favorite region that just calls out to you?
Well, here's the deal. I was a kid, grew up in Minnesota, and read about places that I'd never imagined I'd ever hunt at, right? I never imagined I'd duck hunt at the Great Salt Lake. I never imagined I'd hunt, the Central Valley, California. I never thought I'd hunt the Susquehanna Flats. Green timber in Arkansas seemed like it was completely out of touch, or coastal Louisiana. And again, you hang around an outfit like Delta for 20 years, you get the opportunity to see these places. And I think, Lord knows, Ramsey, you've done a million times more travel than I have. The thing that I love about duck hunting is it's so different depending upon where you are, right? And, hunting mallards and, the prairies, most guys associate it with laying in a grain field. And I'll do that. It's not my favorite way to shoot a mallard. I'd much rather shoot them on the water. But, to have that experience, which is a great one, to shooting them in the green timber in Arkansas, right? Or shooting a specklebelly in, on the Rice Plain in Louisiana. There's just so many experiences, and there's all these different approaches and techniques and species and ducks doing different things in different places. But I think that's the most fascinating thing about waterfowl hunting.
Same here. So that's exactly where I stand with it. It's like, you've got the fundamentals of duck hunting. It's just kind of the same rules, like baseball. It's kind of the same thing. Baseball has a universal rule. Here's how you play, and but you've got these different species, and all these species have different lives from the time they leave Canada to the time they get to the Gulf Coast and the time they fly back. They've got different life cycle requirements, so they'll behave a little bit differently, and then you go into a different habitat or a different type. It's almost like when I think about duck hunting in terms of baseball, it's almost like, especially when you start applying it worldwide, it's almost like traveling with a duffel bag with a few baseball bats and some gloves and some balls and going to Mongolia, going to Utah, going to Argentina, going to Canada, going somewhere, dumping it out and trying to explain to everybody. But it's all the same, but it's so different. And when I look at the little nuances between the fundamentals are the same, the hard-boiled basics are the same, but when you look at the fundamentals of just the duck calls, the cadence and the sounds that people in Washington State versus Southern Arkansas versus Maryland make, it's just different, but it works.
Well, I grew up as a kid thinking that Les Cuba was a deity, right? I loved Les Cuba paintings. And I lived the places that I lived in and hunted the ducks that Les Cuba painted. He painted bluebills, he painted ringnecks, and he painted canvasbacks, and he painted redheads in the north, right? And as a kid, the sky I wanted to see was the Les Cuba sky. It was dark, and it was gray, and it was rough, and it was all those things. Well, I remember the first time I went and hunted with guys that are now dear, dear friends and wonderful Delta Waterfowl supporters down in Arkansas for the first time in 1999. And I remember them telling me, well, it's going to be a great day. It's going to be sunshine. And we don't have good duck hunting. The shooting doesn't get good. The shooting doesn't get good until we see sun on the decoys. And now I look at my experiences hunting puddle ducks in North Dakota, and I'll give you a little insight, Ramsey. My wife would tell you this too. If there's a forecast for a southeast wind and a big blue sky on Sunday, the Devney family magically goes to Mass on Saturday afternoon.
Wow.
Because I want to hunt that big, big blue sky in a cattail marsh on southeast wind. That is the day I am going to mine unlimited nice ducks. And so the Devneys magically go to church on Saturday afternoon, go out to dinner because Dad's going to hunt on that southeast wind on Sunday morning.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I give me sunshine. Almost universally. The only times I've really seen that the wives' tale of dark, sullen skies and high winds and bitter, ugly weather is when you're hunting real big water and there's rafts of divers.
Yep,
that are going to get off that big water to come into protected areas. And I guess my weak spot. Well, let me back up and say this. What I find myself, I love the experiences. That's what I chase. I'm a junkie for the duck hunting experiences. Just something new, something different. And I really have not, kind of in my bucket list is a Minnesota, Wisconsin, Lake Michigan diver hunt. I want to experience that. Because I haven't, but I'd like to. I really like to.
it's funny. So Jason Thorpe in our office, a dear friend of mine, our chief operating officer. Jason's been hunting ducks his whole life, grew up in Bastrop, Louisiana. And, Jason, being from Louisiana, had found a bunch of ducks, but then because he's from Louisiana, forgot that water freezes below 32 degrees. And he had this great duck spot lined up, and I was a little skeptical, knowing, growing up in Minnesota, I know water freezes at 32 degrees. And so I had a plan B. I had a little duck boat along and a bunch of bluebill decoys. The plan A was frozen over, looked like a skating rink. And I said, well, I got a place that's full of bluebills. Let's go hunt them. And I said, here's the deal. We can only shoot 3 apiece that year. And I said, let's just shoot them one at a time. There's plenty of them. We don't need to be in a rush. And the first flock came in, and I fell over laughing because, he grew up hunting puddle ducks and mallards his whole life. And here comes a flock of bills about 1.5 feet over the blocks. You could clearly see where the pattern was hitting, and it was hitting considerably behind the last of the flock. And we had more fun that day just sitting there watching each other miss those things coming through at Mach 9. And knowing full well where you missed them, because the water doesn't lie when it blows up 10 yards behind.
No, the water doesn't lie. You're right. I like a sporty shoot, and I will say one of my favorite ducks to actually hunt when we get into them good is down here in South is ringnecks.
Oh, they're wonderful.
They'll embarrass you all the time. They sure will.
The good news is when they embarrass you, they oftentimes they're so gullible they'll come back and embarrass you over and over again. They just keep doing the figure 8 until they get tired of laughing at you.
That's right. But I do love them. I do love a fast blind diver. When I think of places in the United States, it's we do travel all over the world, but man, America is so blessed with diversity of species, with diversity of habitats, with different hunting types, different little micro niche cultures that a man could really spend his entire life just in the continental 48 in Alaska and never see it all, never experience it all possibly.
Well, and I'll give you for instance on that. I mean, we've got a great chapter in Vermont, which is never a place that, I thought about a lot, right? As a duck hunter, right? You think of Arkansas, you think of Louisiana, you think of Texas, you think of the prairies, you think of California, the East Coast, the Eastern Shore and someplace like that. Well, there's this crazy diehard duck culture, in Vermont and Lake Champlain and shooting golden eyes on Lake Champlain. Like, that's a cool hunt. And that's going to be an experience that a guy that hunts in a, rice field in Arkansas or a green timber field in Arkansas or a natural marsh in Kansas can't even imagine leaning up in a gray coat against a bunch of rocky stuff, hunting over a handful of decoys and 70 feet of water, snowing and blowing like crazy to shoot a whistler. And there's lots of those kind of cool hunts scattered across the country that, I think we can forget about going to, North Dakota or the Platte River or Green Timber of Arkansas or these other sort of heralded places.
Yeah, no, I want to hunt them all. That's just me. It's something about I want to hunt all of it. I want to experience Lake Champlain. I've ridden a ferry across with a bicycle way back in 1990, 30 years ago, but I haven't duck hunted. And there's a lot of those states up in that mid-Atlantic area that I've not hunted in that I want to. And that's just me. I'm just, I don't know what it is. It just possesses me to experience and see that. And maybe that's why, if I could see being say I just want to chase green-winged teal. I mean, you could chase green-wings in a lot of places.
In lots of cool places. In lots of cool really places. Different places, right?
Yeah. Lots of cool places. You mentioned
Salton Sea of California, right? Like, that's a crazy place out in the middle of the desert, and it fills up with green-winged teal.
I'm going to find out this year. California has been high on my list. I'm working through some clients and friends and associates. And the month of January, I'm going to spend a couple of weeks. I might go down to San Diego on an invite, but mostly we're going to hit the, from the grasslands north. If everything goes right, we're going to hunt public, private, starting down around the grasslands and end up hunting those little squeakers, the little Lucian geese up in Humboldt County. And it's just a very ambitious schedule, but California enamors me. You know, when people think of California, they think, you know, Golden Gate Bridge. Well, under that Golden Gate Bridge, a whole lot of scoters. And back in those backwaters is greater scaup and pintails and mallards and a lot of ducks around the fringes. And then, you know, it shocked me a couple of years ago out there meeting some folks, California waterfowl. It shocked me to learn that California is second only to Arkansas in rice production. Production. 700 plus thousand acres of rice production. Only because of their state laws, they can't burn the stubble, so they have to decomp it with water. 700,000 flooded acres of rice. That attracts ducks to this day. A lot of ducks in places, and they've got such a surprising. When you get outside of the craziness you see in Hollywood and Fox News and whatnot, I mean, man, they've got an amazing hunting culture. Die-hard duck hunters, really serious duck hunters, and good habitat to this day.
And you just can't mention the fact to your Louisiana listeners they can shoot 10 specklebellies a day. 10
specklebellies, that's right. And 10 of those little Aleutian geese. Boy, I tell you what, that's an interesting, you speak of specklebellies, that's a real interesting thing. It just, I've got a meeting in the next couple of weeks. I know you know Paul Link, and he's going to discuss some of the specklebelly stuff down southwest Louisiana. It blows my mind that, and I don't think anybody knows for sure, but you might be able to shed some light on it. You know, when you look at the specklebelly migration, it's like a big old hourglass with a real skinny center right there along the South Saskatchewan River on the political boundary between Alberta and Saskatchewan. And at times there will be 750,000 specks lined up in that sanctuary.
Virtually the entire mid-continent population. In a couple hundred square miles, right?
And when they come out of that area, they fan back out to the Pacific, Central, and Mississippi Flyway. Over here in the Pacific Flyway, we're shooting 10, Idaho 10, Louisiana is struggling.
Right.
They've got a fraction of what they used to have. They used to overwinter. Somebody told me one time they overwintered 80% of the Mississippi Flyway population at one time, and now about 18%.
Right.
And that's something's going on.
Well, it's interesting. We were a partner in that project, and Link will do a much better job and cover much greater ground than I will. One of the interesting anecdotes that I saw with that project is the geese were getting there at the same time they always have. And it's really cool because if you draw a map between the South Saskatchewan River and Cameron Parish, you draw a line right over my house. And you can almost set your clock by that specklebelly migration. And October the 10th, I can walk out, go let my dog out or do something in the yard at night, just hear wave after wave after wave of those specklebellies. And I'll get a call from somebody in South Louisiana in 24 hours saying, Specks just got here. Yep, I know, because it just flew over my house.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that Link's study showed is those birds were coming back to Louisiana and getting into, the Gaydon and those places where they've always been. And then once the hunting started, they disappear. And some of them going back to strange places like Indiana. I don't know why in the hell specklebelly would ever be in Indiana. But those birds, once that hunting pressure got on them, they vomited out of there. And it's pretty fascinating to see. But it wasn't this, people talk about short stopping. With specklebellies, those specklebellies are migrating to Gaydon, southwest Louisiana, and then they're redistributing back north.
There's such a myriad of factors affecting migration and behavior of waterfowl. You and I were talking before the show, and I'd like to get into it now or later, but whatever. Anyway, a lot of people knowing that you were going to come on and meet today, it sent me a few texts saying, explain the transitions, explain the migrational behaviors, explain why birds are doing what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, because obviously there are things influencing hunting as we know it today versus, say, 20 or 30 years ago. But it's when we start looking at the hunting pressure, that's what I'm getting back onto is hunting pressure, because you and I were talking before the show about the surveys, Fish and Wildlife surveys, and all the science and all the information, and how we predict and model and set bag limits and all this good stuff that doesn't exist elsewhere in the world, anywhere else in the entire world does it exist at all, let alone like it exists here in America. But it really kind of comes back. We've got to have that information, that data, because of the unbelievable amount of hunting pressure we put on the waterfowl resource as compared to places like Argentina and Mexico and Azerbaijan.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it really, I think the good thing about it is, listen, there's people who don't believe data, right? Like, them, I know them. There are all sorts of people who don't believe data. But, when you talk about, and part of the mismatch, and this is the thing you and I talked about, we had our good conversation down in Mississippi back at the end of February, is I think the waterfowl management community, and I include Delta Waterfowl in this, I'm not being critical of others without being critical of ourselves, is you look at the data we share, and the primary data we share is the primary data we got, which is we share the breeding population. And, that's the big number. We've been collecting that data since 1955. But as you and I talked about when we were together in February, the breeding population isn't what drives success in the fall for duck hunters. It's the amount of baby ducks that those breeders make, right? And you can have years where you've got a lot of adults and not very good production. And you can have years where we've got not that many adults, but great production. And if you had one of these snow goose gurus, every snow goose hunter will tell you when there's really hardcore snow goose hunters and they're scouting for a field to look for geese, they want to see a lot of those gray buggers in those flocks. And they won't hunt them if they're solid white because they know they're going to be hard to hunt. Well, we can't differentiate. Most guys, certainly can't differentiate when they're flying around between a juvenile and adult mallard. But the reality is that phenomenon is alive and well, and we know a couple things. One, we know young dumb ducks make more mistakes than old smart ducks. And here's the other thing that I think we learned in a pretty significant way last summer is when you start looking at the data, especially for the south end of the Mississippi Flyway, when duck production is good on the breeding grounds, the south end of the Mississippi Flyway is the primary beneficiary of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have great duck production, southern end of the Mississippi Flyway has great hunting. And when the production stinks, they don't have as good a hunting. And interestingly enough, Ramsey, it's you guys are more beneficiaries of that than we are.
Sure.
Our duck seasons are short, right?
Sure.
We're going to crop off a few just because we're here early and we're here right with them where they live. But you guys get the benefit of a full 60-day season, and you got more guns in the field, and you got more hunters. And it's pretty clear that the great years in the South are years of great production on the prairies.
John, how we got in that conversation, and boy, it seems like a lifetime ago that myself and you and a lot of the federal and state and NGO people were sitting in Mississippi for the Mississippi Wetlands and Waterfowl Symposium. That seems like a lifetime ago with all that's happened in the past few months. But, kind of how that conversation started is it's too easy for me even to look at a lot of cumulative duck hunting experiences in a season all over the country and then as exacerbated by talking to duck hunters nationwide all day, every day.
Right.
it's real easy for me to and I tell you, I'm just admitting it, man. I become extremely dubious sometimes of the numbers these are paper ducks. I mean, because look at the TV. Look at what's going on with this whole COVID thing.
Right. Nobody believes anything.
Obviously, damn lies and statistics matter because you know they predicated this whole freaking world response on a faulty model that has proved itself to be just a little exacerbated. You know, so but you know you really I do believe numbers don't lie. I do believe that, but at the same time, you know, it's real hard for me sometimes to reconcile what I'm seeing hunting 100+ days a year throughout the entire North American continent with what is on paper and what we're expecting. And I, you know, but you got a lot of variables. You got weather, you got production. You explained something to me in that conversation about May pond counts and breeding pairs and how little it really mattered. It got us all hopeful, but it really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
What really
it had to do with production.
It has to do with the baby ducks that those pairs make. And I'll give you, you know, I'll go back to one of the figures I cited with you is, you know, you take the year, let's take the year 2014. Wet year on the prairie. We had a breeding population of under just a touch over 10 million mallards. When we do a retrospective analysis and look what the production was based on the harvest surveys, the fall flight of mallards that year was almost 29 million. When you go to 2017, where conditions started to dry out a little bit, we had a breeding population, higher breeding population than we did in 2014, or almost, let's call it the same. The fall flight of mallards was 20 million. Well, shit, man, that's a third less mallards.
Yeah.
I mean, if I took 30% of your paycheck out, or any of your listeners' paycheck, you'd feel that, right?
Oh boy, yep.
And so, but again, this is going back to my sort of statement there earlier. We don't have a good means to assess production across the whole of the breeding grounds until we see the harvest, until we see what hunters turn in through the wing beat.
After the fact. Yeah.
After the fact. So we talk about the May pond count, and May pond counts are important. We talk about the breeding population. That's important. But what those two values mean in terms of what it means for ducks produced can mean, you know, again, the same number of breeding mallards could get you a fall flight of over 28 or right at 20. That's a big difference.
Yep. John, would you agree that in the last 20 years, or do y'all even have data to support that in the last 20 years hunting pressure has increased in North America?
Actually, the days of field for hunters has actually decreased because we've lost a whole pile of duck hunters. Now,
but we've also lost a lot of how am I trying to work?
We've lost a lot of access. And so
that's, yeah. So I mean, it's kind of a balancing act. I mean, go to Mississippi public land or any public land and tell somebody there's a decrease in hunters.
Well, I almost got hung and quartered talking about declining hunter numbers in Louisiana. They said, you haven't been where I hunt. And I said, guys, but yeah, I understand your experience, but you know, let me frame it this way. We used to have 100 rats in the Superdome. Now we got 10 rats in a shoebox. We still got less rats, but you're bumping into each other a lot more.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And listen, the guys that are hunting today, a pretty good chunk of them are traveling, are better equipped, have better access to information, and frankly are way better at it. Look at the stuff. I mean, when I was a kid, Ramsey, and I'll be 50 this year. It's not like I'm 90, right? But when I was a kid, the Cabela's waterfowl section was 4 pages that included waders. Max will have 63 pages of duck calls in their catalog, right?
Sure.
So the business of duck hunting has changed. The way hunters, 25 years ago, how many hunters from Arkansas went to Saskatchewan? Not very many. Today, a bunch of them do.
All right, now, that's exactly where I was trying to take this conversation, because as compared to my granddad back in the, quote, good old days. My granddad might have hunted most weekends. Probably didn't hunt all weekends. But he'd leave the office on Friday, go duck hunt Saturday and Sunday mornings, come back and work, during the Delta. And I wonder what he would think about somebody like myself that just is possessed. And I'd say every duck hunter I know, pick a spot. Most every duck hunter I know, especially by the time they get to their late 30s and 40s, they're at least going to go a few states over or get a plane ticket to go to Canada, go do this, go do that. Now, here's where I'm getting at. It's all about production. It's all about the number of baby ducks, the number of hatch-year birds flying down south. We go back, when we go back to when these models, when the current model of North American duck hunting was established, would you say it was adaptive harvest management 20 years ago, 1998?
Well,
that were put into place?
1995 is the first year of that harvest management strategy.
And it's pretty much still the same strategy?
Well, adaptive harvest management by its nature is supposed to be adaptive. And so basically adaptive harvest management had a couple of objectives. One, it quit the chaos and the fighting that occurred in the Flyway, most notoriously in the North and the South Mississippi Flyway, where those stories.
Back during the Bill Clinton administration, it was written into the national budget, the extension of duck season in the Deep South.
Exactly. And so adaptive harvest management was really to sort of set a framework where we make decisions without having to have a bloody damn war every year about duck regulations. So that's one thing it did. The other thing it was supposed to do was supposed to answer questions. It started out with 4 different model weights. So we've got this big question about duck populations, right? Is harvest additive or is it compensatory? And is there strong or weak density dependence? So what they did is they created 4 models that were quote unquote competing as we populated them with data. So we start with the number of ducks. We predict how many we're going to kill. And then we predict how many are going to be there the next year. And then those model weights adjust over time. And it gives us the best ability to predict the outcome of our seasons. Well, the reality is we're not going to learn that much because we're not going to shoot the hell out of ducks when populations are low, and we're not going to not have a duck season when populations are high, right? So we can't run the great experiment. But what it's done is it's created what adaptive harvest management is saying is, with a liberal season, what it should be, what I think there's a difference between what it's saying to duck hunters and what duck hunters hear. And I understand that. So a duck hunter says, well, we're going to have a liberal season. Well, that tells me that there's a lot of ducks out there. But it really isn't saying that. What it's saying is we can safely shoot ducks at this harvest rate without hurting populations. It isn't the notion that there's lots of ducks like it used to be when we were kids in the 70s. When duck populations were high, we had liberal bag limits. When duck populations and production on the prairies was kind of crummy, we had more restrictive limits. That isn't the way the system runs anymore. System basically says you can have 6 and 60 because we don't think you're going to harm populations at these population levels and at these harvest rates.
Okay, to which I'm going to add, to get back on this new hunter, this traveling hunter, this hunting pressure, this connect to young birds flying all the way down the Flyway.
Yep.
Is it possible? Because it seems to me to be possible. I'm just a redneck duck hunter, but it seems to me that it's possible that maybe, is it possible? I'm not going to say, is it possible that we are over harvesting hatch year mallards in Canada?
No. Here's what I'm going to tell you.
Wait a minute, John. Come on now, John. It's a slam dunk. Eight mallards a day. Brown ducks, no hens, no. It don't matter.
Shoot them in the dark in a pea field. I get it. Over
Come on, man. It's a gimme. Go to Canada. You're gonna shoot practically every day. You go duck hunting. You're gonna shoot your 8 ducks. as compared to my granddad's era, when very few ducks got shot back then. I'm being a devil's advocate here, but I'm asking.
So in 1974, both Saskatchewan and Alberta shot more mallard ducks than Arkansas did.
Wow.
In today, Saskatchewan shooting about 200,000 mallard ducks. So you're right. There's a bunch of guys getting on airplanes, hiring guides, flying to the Saskatoon airport. But guess what? You've lost 75% of the Saskatchewan residents. There are years that there are more Americans hunting in Saskatchewan than there are Saskatchewan residents.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've gone to Mexico, you've hunted Mexico, and we all hear the guys scream and yell about the high bag limits in Mexico. Russell, why can we have high bag limits in Mexico?
Mm-hmm. I get where you're going. It balances out that hunting pressure equation. You take into account the what's that term they use for harvest distribution? Hunter harvest distribution. I guess that is it, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. And so what's happened is, yes, there are lots of Americans hunting with lots of guides in Canada, but they come up and do it for 4 days and go home. Right?
Yeah.
And yes, that is happening for 30 days, 40 days in Saskatchewan every year. But what it doesn't account for is the fact that every farm kid in a CCM or a Canadiens jersey was running around pot shooting ducks all over Saskatchewan in the 70s. And honestly,
wow.
Guys, if you look at the harvest estimates, both Saskatchewan and Alberta shot more mallards in 1974 than Arkansas did.
Wow, the numbers don't lie. That's an interesting number to know. 1974. You know, John, speaking of Mexico, if I and rarely do I feel like this, but if I just feel like I need to be beaten in social media like a rented mule. If I wake up tomorrow and I decide, you know what, life is going too good, I want about 50 people to hate me and ban me and crucify me as the Antichrist of Northern Pintails. All I need to do is go hold up 15 Drake Sprigs from Mexico.
Yeah,
post it up on the internet.
Your mailbox will be cashed in by lunchtime, won't it, bud?
Oh, it's infuriating. It you know, and never mind the fact that as recently as I kept up with a couple of years ago, I can shoot 8 pintails in Canada, 4 pintails in 8 pintails in Alaska, 4 pintails in Canada, 1 pintail, maybe 2 this year in the one. Okay, 1 nationwide in the lower 48, 15 down in Mexico. And but boy, that's not hunting. And trying to explain. And I've got in my notes on my phone, just so when the subject comes up, I can cite it. It's been known since the late 70s what the problem with pintails are, and it's not hunting. It's not hunter harvest, is it?
No. We've lost all the little itty bitty wetlands in Prairie Canada, and their production's terrible. No-till farming, residual, as I understand it. Yeah, ecological. Actually, we're just talking about this stuff in the last couple of days. It's this ecological trap of pintails believing that last year's wheat stubble is grass. They nest
short
in
grass
it.
prairie. Yeah,
they think it looks like nesting cover. They nest in it. The overwhelming majority of those nests amazingly get hammered by predators. If they don't get hammered by predators, or if they get hammered by predators and they re-nest in that same stuff, they get whacked by the air seeder. And pintails are the only duck that'll nest in that stuff. Mallards wouldn't touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole.
Has there been any empirical data or estimates done on how many millions, maybe, of pintail eggs fall to the plow or get decimated because of their wanting to nest in last year's residual crop? I mean, would you guess? I mean,
I'm not going to guess an empirical number, but I mean, we just finished supporting a PhD or postdoc at Colorado State University that looked at that question and looked at pintail populations at the transect, Fish and Wildlife Service transect by transect level. And the number one attribute that they found was this ecological trap hypothesis, that pintail love nesting in that stuff. But again, everybody believed in the late 1990s that the fate of those pintail nests was getting whacked by the air seeder. Well, Ken Richkiss, who did his master's and his PhD at LSU and supported as a Delta graduate, now is a bigwig with the Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Program. He followed the fate of those nests. The overwhelming majority of them got depredated before the air seeder ever got there.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd never imagined that predators were out foraging in those stubble fields, but there are a lot of pintail nests that will tell you otherwise.
Right. No, it's sad. That, again, favorite duck. I love pintails. I love them. I love them. I don't think there's hardly anything that you talk about watching massive flocks. Just to sit on the point on a bay near the Sea of Cortez or parts of Mexico and see hundreds and hundreds of pintail just working. Just to see them working. I find myself running out of air. I'm holding my breath just watching them spellbound.
Yeah, and the one thing you'll notice about pintail is the sex ratios are completely out of whack. And the harvest data bears this out. And I mean, I was lucky enough. I had some business in California, and I got to sneak in a one-day duck hunt up in District 10, which is just east of the Butte Sink. And there were lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of pintail around. There was not a time every single bunch of pintail that we saw was one hen with 5 to 15 drakes.
Yeah. That could speak a lot. As I remember, like I say, I'm no biologist, but I do remember Rick Kaminsky talking at Mississippi State that the amount of energy it takes for a hen to produce a hen duckling or a hen egg versus a male egg is substantial. And if you're looking at maybe a lot of the pintails we are seeing are re-nest or second nest, that could be a reason why, I would think.
Well, and the other thing that you're dealing with is, if you're a drake on the spring on the prairies, you live. If you're a hen, not so much.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow. Well, I get that.
Differential survival between drakes and hens during the nesting season, it's not even comparable. I mean, drakes do stupid stuff and get caught up into a 3-bird flight and fly across 94 and T-bone into the side of a semi. Females get eaten, and drakes do not get eaten.
No. John, when we were meeting in Mississippi and sitting around having a few cocktails and enjoying each other's company, we were talking about some of the issues in waterfowl management, some of the limitations, some of the banding studies, for example. Budget constraints already. But remind me what we were talking about there.
Well, we were talking about how the banding program, I think you had mentioned you just don't see the number of bands you used to. And I hear that from hunters a lot. And there's a reason for that. We're banding a lot fewer ducks. And, you go back to, let's use 2010 as sort of a benchmark here. You look at what's happened to the Fish and Wildlife Service from 2010. And listen, this isn't a political speech. There's Republican and Democrat blood all over this issue. So this isn't a partisan issue. But since 2010, our migratory bird management capacity at the Fish and Wildlife Service has been cashed out, and our refuge system has been cashed out. I mean, we had a meeting, us, DU, and others had a meeting down in Arkansas in January, which you will recognize as good timing, to talk about our policy priorities. And one of the things we were talking about is the banding program and refuges, and what are we going to do about refuges? Since 2010, Ramsey, the refuge system has lost 1,000 full-time staff. And at the same time, now that's the migratory bird program hasn't suffered the same losses, but proportionally they have. And so, the very bedrock information that we need to manage ducks for duck hunters is waning. One of the biggest banding stations, and a lot of your listeners, I can guarantee you, have certificates that say J. Clark Salyer National Wildlife Refuge.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's one of the most important banding stations in the mid-continent. It's one of the most important banding stations for pintails, period, in the prairies. And J. Clark Salyer walked away from their banding program. Couldn't afford to do it anymore. Sand Lake National Wildlife Refuge, again, incredibly important refuge in northeast South Dakota, suspended their banding program. Well, that means that if we don't fix that, we're going to be dealing with imperfect. Listen, all data is imperfect to some degree, right? But the more imperfect data you have is better than less imperfect data. And so we can find ourselves in a situation trying to manage a complex species like North American waterfowl with having less information instead of more. And that's going to make our job making sure regulations are both meeting the needs of ducks and duck hunters in the future a hell of a lot harder.
Well, if I understand what you said previously, is we're assessing this year's productivity based on harvest data, which would translate into band recoveries. We don't really need the band to figure out that a duck from Saskatchewan is flying to Central Arkansas. We need it at a form of harvest, right?
Harvest and survival rate. Yeah, to be able to compute harvest and survival rate.
Yeah. And all I know about statistics is a little, but really and truly, the bigger your data set,
the better you are.
The better your guess.
Yeah.
Do you think we're surveying enough? Do you think our pond counts are enough? Do you think the transects are flying right now enough? Or have you seen any data or statistic that indicates that we would probably better serve with bigger sampling?
Yeah, the challenge you have is, again, going back to so you're right. So at some point, more data is better than less, right? I mean, let's assume that's fact, and that is fact. The other fact about data, though, is your ability to compare it to data in previous years. And so what you really want is long-term data sets, and that's what the current breeding population gives us. And listen, I recognize there's all sorts of folks that are skeptical about flying around on predetermined transects and counting ducks from an airplane at 100 miles up and 100 miles an hour. But what I will tell you is that there are other survey methods. Fish and Wildlife Service also does what they call a 4 square mile survey through the Refuge program, which we use for other purposes, not management. And the numbers aren't the same, but man, are they tightly correlated. So it's a really good survey. It's really robust data. And when we're talking about things like understanding how pintail populations or bluebill populations or mallard populations are changing over time, having that foundation going all the way back to 1955 is completely invaluable.
Yeah. I know, I've heard the, aerial surveys. It's been a little dubious. You're flying transects and the way you do it. But, I actually, while working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as a dumb forester, became the guy for a couple of seasons that flew midwinter waterfowl counts in our refuge, North Mississippi. Learned a lot, enjoyed it greatly. I was always suspect of my own numbers because you don't just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, okay, that must be 100. That must be. And I was concerned, and I said something to the senior biologist who technically was supposed to do it, but that just wasn't he cared for. He didn't care for it, so he pawned it off on me, and greatly, I loved it. But what he explained to me and showed me the data is that he said, Ramsey, I might fly over that field and count 300. You might fly over that field and count 600. He said that number doesn't matter. He said because this has been proven as a fact. He says, I fly over the next time and I see 600. you're going to fly over next time and count 1,200. He said,
right.
He said that
the bias is
that relative percent.
Yeah.
He said, we're going to perceive that percent the same. He said, and the trends up and down is really what matters.
Right.
You know, not the number. The number's just a number. That's just a guess. He said, but he said it's been proven over time. And so I gained a little confidence. One of the most astounding things I ever saw in North Mississippi, I just got to say this, the whole entire Mississippi Delta froze up, which tell you how long ago it was. And we had a section of sanctuary. And I flew over that pilot, the little fixed-wing aircraft. We circled at 500 feet, at 1,000 feet, at 1,500 feet, back to a 5. We circled. Well, I'm looking down on that section, trying to count ducks and speciate it. Till I was just about nauseous like a carnival ride. And I remember that number that I found when I tallied it up. It was 62,500 ducks.
Yep. On one
and I'm like, that can't possibly be. That's a duck a square foot on an acre or more.
Yep.
And 3 or 4 days later, the state waterfowl biologist for the state of Mississippi then had flown it, and he called me up and said, hey, is that y'all's property over off 32? I go, yeah. He says, have you flown it lately? I said, yeah. And we came up with exactly. He said, man, he said, I got sick flying over that thing trying to figure it out. And he said, you mind if we swap notes? Not only did we have the number the same, but our species, was this many mallard, this many shovelers, this many greenwings, this many, it was the same. So we felt very good about that estimate.
Well, and just going back to the prairie experience, remember what you're counting on the prairies isn't big bunches. Here's a mallard pair. There's a
little family cohort.
Pair. Yeah, I mean, you know, yes, there's indicated pairs, which means there's 6 Drake mallards sitting on a mudflat somewhere, but it's pair. It isn't 20,000 here and 500 here. They're all paired out and spread pond to pond to pond to pond to pond.
No, John, everybody listening, myself included, you, everybody in the world I know has been affected at some level by this pandemic.
Yep.
And I'm not going to even get into all the tinfoil hat conspiracy, but nonetheless, it's affected everybody. I know people that is really hurting. I'm sitting here wondering what the future is going to look like for myself, for my family, for my business. Who knows? How's it affecting Delta waterfowl?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we're doing really well on the 28th of May, 2020. I think, just as any business person would do, when this thing first hit, we had to get pretty cautious and pretty concerned, right? And we managed to the reality. But, we're facing a pretty big unknown, Ramsey, and I don't think I'm talking out of school. And when I say our friends at DU or Pheasants Forever or National Wild Turkey Federation, all the critter groups that your folks support.
All of them. Yep.
We don't know what the fall's going to look like. And, before the show, I told you, I'm going to be pretty surprised if there aren't 110,000 coon asses in Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge in September, just because I think I know human beings. But, what if...
Wait a minute. Say that. You're saying you do not think there will be 100,000?
No, I'd be surprised if there weren't 100,000 coon asses in Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge in September.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Am I willing to bet my paycheck on it?
Right.
And, you've got organizations like ours and others that are looking into the future, and based on current guidelines, we're not allowed to hold a fundraising event under current guidelines. 95% of the country. And so, we're in good shape right now, and we're taking steps to mitigate against the risk that may be coming at us this fall, but it's a huge unknown. And so we're doing the best we can to manage through the great unknown.
That's all we can do. But it concerned me because, and how is Fish and Wildlife Service? How are the banding activities? How are the survey activities this year?
No surveys. I mean, the Canadian Wildlife Service shut down everything in the Arctic. There'll be no banding activities on Arctic geese this year. We're not counting ducks. The only duck survey that will be conducted in North America this year is North Dakota Game and Fishes Survey.
And so for the first time, the North American model, for the first time in North American waterfowl model history, we're kind of going into the future like a third world country, not knowing.
Exactly.
That's scary stuff.
Except for the fact that I can, listen, it's really wet in North Dakota. It's really wet in South Dakota. Kind of dry and crappy in Saskatchewan. We're going to have plenty of ducks. We're going to have plenty of good production out of the U.S. side of the prairies. We're flying blind, but we're flying blind with really good sideboards on us. And so we're not going to destroy North American duck population because we missed a survey. I wish we weren't going to miss it, but we are. And it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, the banding activities are going to be down. The survey activities are shut down. We're not going to ban in the Arctic. Yeah, it's having a really significant impact. I mean, there are places, there's duck hunters madder than hell in Utah right now because the refuge managers aren't managing water the way they think they should. Well, no kidding. They can't work. And so, there's all sorts of consequences.
You didn't say this, I said this, but from what I understand, having spent a little time out in Utah, that issue pre-exists COVID.
Oh yes, they're always
they need to step up a little bit if they're listening. They need to get out there and manage water a little bit better for some of that pond sago weed and everything else. I mean, the state biologists are doing an extraordinary, unbelievable job managing some of those state resources. So, but I'm not. I didn't mean to interrupt you, John. I'm sorry.
But so yeah, I mean, we don't. So in terms of what it means for Delta, we're hopeful but cautious, and probably being more defensive. I think like anybody would prudently run their business, preparing for not so great, hoping for the best. And I think all of our colleagues in this space that have, rely on membership and banquet revenue, I think we're all sort of in the same boat. I mean, I think we're just all, we're all just hoping that life returns to normal. But that doesn't make us much different from the rest of America. I don't think
rest of the world, actually. That's really, they're as normal in Mississippi as it's kind of starting to feel again. It's weird. Now, I was telling somebody the other day, I've got to share this with y'all. Buddy calls up and says, "Hey, we're frying catfish at camp. Come over." And I've been kind of hunkered down, and we drove over, and there were 5 or 6 couples. We had a couple of drinks. We sat down. He fried fish. It was the best fried catfish I've ever eaten. And I told him, he said, "You've had my catfish a million times. You cook it the same way every time." I go, "Yeah, but it tasted so freaking normal."
Right.
Just to be here with long-term friends and family sharing and breaking bread and eating, it just felt so normal. And I think everybody, right. and but at the same time, I go to the grocery store and it don't feel normal. It feels kind of weird.
Yep, I agree.
It feels kind of weird. And I wondered, that's one thing I wanted to ask you, just how you felt COVID would affect Delta waterfowl, obviously, but also just the waterfowl conservation efforts at large. I mean, I'm sitting here watching the politicians spend money like sailors on leave, but I hadn't heard waterfowl or anything I'm interested in mentioned other than my livelihood, but I haven't heard conservation.
Well,
have you seen or heard anything? Okay.
We're working on it. Yeah. We figure if we're going to spend all the money we're spending, there's a number of us trying to make sure some of it benefits ducks and duck hunters. So I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Good. John, we really appreciate having you on today. I enjoy every time I see you, every time I'm around you and get to visit with you and pick your brain. You're a fountain of knowledge. And I tell you what, I'm kind of glad you're not a rocket scientist biologist, because I think that's why you're able to articulate a very complicated subject, or very complicated subjects, plural, in a way that a simple guy like me can understand it.
Well, man, here's the deal. I've enjoyed it immensely too. I could do this for hours and hours on end. So anytime that I can be a resource for you and your listeners, I'm delighted to do it. And we'll have more good information coming out of the prairies here in the next couple of weeks. I'd be delighted to share.
Good deal. I'll be creek, God willing, and the creek don't rise. I'll be passing through North Dakota this year, and I'd love to stop by and visit with you and some of your staff. We didn't even cover. We're kind of running out of time, but you know, I've just got to share this with you. It is one more little topic we can talk, but I was hunting down in Mexico with Ben Peterson.
Yep.
And, you know, I'd laid my gun aside. I was tired of shooting. We had a great brand hunt that morning. I was tired of shooting, but we were just going to pick a few teal and ducks, and some of the boys still wanted cinnamon. So I was sitting there just enjoying the conversation, and I had not heard this subject yet, but I've got a degree in wildlife, went to Mississippi State University. I'm going to say there were 5 or 6 dozen of us that graduated that year in wildlife and forestry. And, back in those days, we were all hook and bullet biologists. I mean, we all grew up hunting and fishing.
Right.
And just
you all had an 870. You all had an 870 in the back of the truck and a black light Slayer.
That's it. I mean, yeah, it's just we all grew up hunting and fishing. We all got led into wildlife management. And I got to talking to a very close friend of mine now. And one of my professors back then, he's now working at Mississippi State University, and he got to explain to me that extended wildlife program is, maybe he said 300 people, right? 300 students at that program now, and he just explained to me how relatively few of them have a hook and bullet background. A lot of them just are they love nature, they want to be outside, they like wildlife, so they get into one of the various little fields they've got in there now. Back when I was there, it was just wildlife. Now it's a lot of different little fields and paths you can go. But Ben began to explain to me this program y'all got where y'all are actually going into universities and exposing these young students to hunting, because they are, if it shakes out and they get a degree in the field one day, they will be our future policy makers. And it's kind of sort of important they at least recognize the value of hunting to conservation.
Yeah, I mean, they don't. You know, not only did they grow up hunting and fishing in our generation, they grew up on farms, right?
Yeah.
And that's over too. So guess what? They don't like farmers, they don't like hunters, and they don't like fishermen. That's not a great recipe for our future.
I got a buddy whose daughter went and banded rails and gallon mules and whatnot on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Keep up with them in social media. And just making conversation with her. I heard Daddy's a hunter, one of my duck hunting buddies. But just making conversation with her over crawfish, asked her where. And she wouldn't tell me. She was scared to death I'd go down there and try to hunt those birds. I'm like, I was just curious where in the marsh. I was shocked to learn that those birds, I just thought, you know, the migratory birds, these clapper rails and king rails, I just assumed they migrated, but I was surprised to learn they spend most of their lives in that Gulf Coast marsh down there in Mississippi.
Yeah, a lot of them do.
They're not migrating. And but boy, she would not tell me, even after dinner, even after I made a second pass, she wasn't about to pinpoint where those birds were. You know, but anyway, John, how can people? What's the best way for people to connect to Delta Waterfowl in social media?
You know, our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, all great resources. Talk about what we're doing. You know, we've taken this opportunity or the challenge with COVID that it's presented, recognizing we're not out in front of people as much. We produce some incredible content about, you know, why breeding ducks do what they do in Delta Solutions, you know, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our website's great. And listen, if you guys want to contact me directly, just call the Delta office here in Bismarck. I'd be delighted to visit.
Yeah, 10-4. Folks, thank y'all for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope your world starts to spin around a little bit more. And just remember, life's short, get ducks. See you next time.
Duck Season Somewhere is produced by Ben Page. Original soundtrack by our friend Cody Huggins.